surah. I know I have 2 minutes left, and in this 2 minutes I want to give you a synopsis of just violence in Islam, because now we're dealing with battlefield, and I want, especially the younger brothers and sisters, to understand these things correctly, in line with how it's been understood for centuries. Does the Quran talk about fighting? Sure. Does it talk about killing disbelievers? Sure. Okay. Now there are two kinds of approaches. You can have an approach, we have to understand the context in which it was said before we draw lessons from it for our life. Here's the other approach. Allah said it, we should do it. Sounds good. Allah said it, we should do it. It sounds very appealing. And you can find very strong speakers talking about, that's what Allah says. And He says, follow what He says. And Muslims are sitting, especially hot-blooded young brothers sitting in the audience who have all kinds of frustrations about not getting married, or, have bad relationships with their parents and can't get away from their addictions to all kinds of filth on the internet. They've got to let their frustrations out somewhere, so they go, Takbir! There's a lot of other psychological stuff going on, but it comes out in this. That's how it comes out. You don't want to understand it, you don't want to study it. You don't want to make jihad studying soft. Right? But you want to get to the battlefield, because that you figured it all out. You haven't figured anything out. Historically speaking, and I like to organize your thoughts about this in this way. I've run this by several scholars and they've all kind of okayed it for me. So I feel confident in sharing it with you. You can organize violence into 3 categories. And I'd like you to remember that. You can organize violence into 3 categories. Self-defense, retaliation, and preemptive violence. I'll say that again. Self-defense, retaliation, and preemptive violence. Self-defense, of course, a simple example, somebody invades your home, you're fighting them back to kick them out of your home, or you even kill them. That would be considered self-defense in any country. And you would have the right, you had the right to do that not only in Islam, and if you died doing so, you're a shaheed in Islam, and if you killed them, you're not a wrongdoer, because you were doing that in self-defense. And that would be something constitutional pretty much in any civilized country. It's not something exceptional to Islam. That's the first kind of violence. That's the right of an individual. Not only the right of an individual, but also the right of a country. So a community has a right to self-defense, and an individual has a right to self-defense. What was the second kind of violence I mentioned? Retaliation. Retaliation means somebody came, attacked you or your family, and they left. And they've already turned the corner and they're 2 blocks ahead. You hop in your car and you go hunt them down and you crash into their car and then you fight them. That would be retaliation. That's no longer self-defense. That would be retaliation. Retaliation in Islamic discourse, among our fuqaha, in tafsir, all over the place, retaliation has been a matter of judicial law. It has never been an individual prerogative. Individuals cannot retaliate. A state can retaliate. Individuals don't retaliate. Groups can't retaliate under a state. The state has to retaliate. And if individuals could retaliate, you know what would happen in Islamic history? Did we ever live as an Islamic civilization where there was a rule of law and government and khilafah and all this stuff? It was there. If it was ever understood that you can do retaliation yourself, then we would never have civilization. It would be the Wild West. Or East in our case, right? So it would just be you go and kill anyone you want to. Hey, because he did something to me. You could retaliate. What's preemptive violence? So the first one, self-defense, you could do yourself or as a state. The second one is only done under the guise of a state. And historically, it's always been like that. It's always been understood like that. There's never been a difference about this. The third, what's the third kind of violence? Preemptive. They haven't done anything to you. You're going to go after them. Or you're saying they might do something to me. So before they get a chance to, I'll do it to them. Preemptive strike, they call it in military terms, right? Preemptive strike. Now preemptive strikes do exist in Islamic history and in Islamic discourse among the fuqaha. But also preemptive strikes are only a matter of what? Of the state. This is not something the individual can take in their hands. Now, add to all of this, are there punishments in Islam, in the Sharia, that can harm an individual person physically? Sure. Punishment of zina is pretty harsh, pretty tough punishment. Punishment of stealing, pretty tough punishment. Punishment of murder, pretty tough punishment. These are called punitive kinds of punishments, right? Where you can physically harm someone. You can physically harm someone as a punishment. these kinds of laws that are executed, none of these laws can be executed at the individual level. None of them. They all have to be executed how? By the state. And when you have a state, is it sometimes the case that a state decides or passes a ruling or a constitutional amendment and says, we've come up with an additional punishment? We've got an additional punishment for this crime. Does that happen? It even happened in Islamic history. Umar bin al-Khattab comes out with different punishments. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq decides a punishment for people who deny zakat. He does. Because there's room for that at the level of state. There's room for that ijtihad. But at the individual level, these have never been individual initiatives. Now what's happening in our times? There are elements with, first of all, enemies of Islam, people who hate Islam, who like to, use the copies of the Quran at their barbecues or whatever. These are the people that would love to say that all the ayat about violence are all talking at what level? At the individual level. Then when it says, strike their necks, that's your neighbor. He's sharpening his knife right now. You know that FedEx package he got? Watch out. Here's the verse. That's why he's going to Bed Bath & Beyond. So, that's what they're trying to spread, that it's individual. And an element within the ummah, trying to put blogs and lectures and talks and all this stuff, also trying to convince masses of youth that these initiatives are also rightfully for the individual. This is a gross mistake. Because if this is individual, then all laws are individual. And if all laws are individual, then things like, cutting the hand of the thief. Or, the punishment of that Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, he fought those who denied zakah. So your neighbor, you found out somehow, because you've been looking into his tax returns, you found out he didn't give zakat. So you go over one day. Hey, I want to talk to you. Can we go to your basement? Thank God Texas doesn't have basements, right? So I'm still thinking in New York terms. You found out somebody stole something. Chop in the basement or in the wudu area at the masjid. Nope, can't do that. That's not how the deen works. So we've taken things that were meant to be at the collective level, and we've tried to, in our rage, turn them into individual initiatives. And I know life gets more complicated than these three simple categories. I know that. But this is the framework in which we have to organize our thought. This is what it comes under. And this is how, even when this ayah came, I didn't give you the discussions of the fuqaha. I'm closing with this one. We'll talk about the discussions of fuqaha, what to do with prisoners of war, in what situations do we deal with them, what about the ayat in Surah Al-Anfal that came down, why did you forgive them, why did you let them go? We'll study those ayat too. Do those ayat abrogate these ayat, or do these ayat abrogate those ayat? We have to have that conversation also. Right? But whenever they talked about it, you will find, if it's Imam al-Shafi'i talking, or if it's Imam Abu Hanifa talking, Amirul Mu'mineen, Khalifatul Mu'mineen, they're talking about the leader, the head of the state, the khilafah, the ruler, the governing body, never at the individual level, never. I haven't seen it. So this is something we have to get clear about. And one of the reasons I chose this surah is because it lets us talk about this topic and try to get clear our heads about this matter, inshallah ta'ala. If we're not clear about it, we can't clarify it to anybody else. And wallahi, I'm not really concerned about clarifying it to people that are bent on demonizing us, because even if we clarified it to them till we're blue in the face, they wouldn't care. But at the very least, we should be clear about it ourselves. And we should know that people who do certain kinds of acts are out of line from the deen. They're not acceptable, even if they're Muslims, even if they think they're doing it fi sabilillah. May Allah Azza wa Jal give us a correct, honest, sincere understanding of His book. May Allah Azza wa Jal remove confusion from our hearts. May Allah Azza wa Jal guide us by means of His book and commit us to His book and the sunnah of His messenger sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. Barakallahu li wa lakum fil Qur'an al-Hakim wa nafa'ni wa iyyakum bil ayati wa dhikr al-Hakim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.